Hello, everyone. Today we are recording we're discussing very important subject matter. And I invited Dr. Kaplin to answer our question about this very important subject matter. And first, I would like to start with very short statistic provided by Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And statistics tells us cannabis is the most commonly used federally illegal drug in the United States. 52.5 million people, or about 90% of Americans, used it at least once in 2021. Recent research estimated that approximately 3 in 10 people who use cannabis have cannabis use disorder. The question about cannabis is there are so many speculations, so many beliefs, disbeliefs, approaches, perspectives. So I believe we need someone like Dr. Kaplin with experience and knowledge who would a little bit help us to clarify what's going on and how we're supposed to react to the certain things regarding the cannabis. So we're talking about cannabis today.
Yes.
Dr. Kaplin, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for asking me. I couldn't agree with you more. It's a very important topic.
First question. Regarding the benefits of the usage cannabinoids for pain management, because a lot of people use it as a pain relief.
Yeah.
Is it justified? Like, does it really work? Like, are there really benefits of usage of it? What do we know?
So it's a very important question. There is still, ironically, some debate. I think that the data is sufficient. Certainly the data in animals, and animals are not subjected to
completely human.
Yes. And they're not, the placebo effect doesn't have such a big deal when you're working with animals. No question it has analgesic, meaning it helps relieve pain. The phenomenon is one that many of us who have studied this think that, ironically, it might not actually lead to relief of pain directly as much as it sort of, when you're high, you care less about the pain. So it's kind of a funny phenomenon. It's not an anesthetic, for instance, like lidocaine, where you feel less pain. You're stoned and you don't care as much about the pain. That's one thing. There is no question that there is statistically a consistent finding, but I think that what's important to realize is that it's about a 30% decrease in pain. So 30% is not nothing, and this is on average. For some people, it's going to be 50% of people would be more than 30%, 50% of people less than 30%. I think that the important consideration is that the number needed to treat, which is one way we sort of establish how robust the effect is. To get that 30%, you have to treat 24 people. So that's a large number of people who are going to be exposed to a drug in order to get a relatively modest effect. Now, what we don't know is definitively, but we do have some evidence for, is that people who use cannabis do have a decreased use of opiates. So that's a good thing, especially because opiates have, over the last couple of decades, led to innumerable number of deaths because of fentanyl and this kind of stuff. So that is good. The important thing, and it's what I suspect we're going to be talking about here, is that it's always a risk benefit. Any drug that you take has benefits, and pain is a terrible thing. However, the question is, how about the risks? How does one counterbalance the risks and benefits? And one of the big problems in this area, for which I'm appreciative that, the Human Brain Expo and you are making sure that we have a discussion about this, is that nobody's talking about these potential risks. To balance, is the treatment worse than the disease? And that's always a consideration. And one that I think is worth exploring. So there are many potential side effects, but I think we're going to get into those. So let me
Yes. What about side effects? Is the like when we're talking about side effects related to cannabis? Because as I know, what I've heard from a lot of people who actually use it, like not my close circle, but I've heard a lot in the gym, when you exercise, and in some sport field, they say, well, cannabis is a natural thing.
Yeah.
What can be wrong? And all of them have very strong belief that they cannot hurt themselves only because that's naturally occurring ingredient. It's a naturally occurring stuff. What can be wrong?
Yeah, the irony of this, the real irony is that it is a natural substance, but the irony is that it is produced by this plant, the hemp plant, the sativa, cannabis sativa. It's produced as a reaction to try to ward off being eaten by predators. So this is a substance that plants produce in response to not wanting to be destroyed. And so it's a toxic substance that the plants are producing that has, toxic effects on our cognition, and a number of other sort of, states. And it's doing this to protect itself. So it's not just like, oh, it's a totally benign natural thing. We just happen to like the toxic effects that we have. But if you could imagine, if you're out there in the savannah of Africa when we were evolving and all of this, and you start eating a plant that then makes you cognitively impaired, that's not a good thing, if you want to get away from predators and these things. And it's also something that in low doses does help with pain, can decrease anxiety, but in high doses, it worsens anxiety and it can cause psychosis. So it is a toxic chemical produced by plants in an effort to ward off predators from eating those plants. So it's not as simple as just to say, well, of course, it's just a natural chemical. It's a natural chemical, kind of like bee stings are a natural chemical, but they're being used by bees to prevent you from, stepping on them and this kind of things. So just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe inherently.
The question about what do we know about impact on mental health conditions? If, for example, people already have certain condition, depression, anxiety, or bipolar, schizophrenia, any other condition, what do you know how cannabis can influence?
So this is really, and I'm a neuropsychiatrist, so for me, this is very much a critically important thing. So you're absolutely right in pointing this out. I think that for many people, just like many people can drink responsibly, but alcohol can cause terrible car accidents, and there's all sorts of laws about driving while intoxicated. For vulnerable populations, the cognitive, and so I think I'm going to get to the very critical issue you're bringing up, which is mental health. But just to get there, it does have, for vulnerable populations, it affects cognition, and particularly for children, it shaves up to 8 IQ points off. If in adolescence they start smoking heavily, it will shave IQ points that they will never get back. So for certain populations,
it's 6 IQ points.
Yeah, 6 to 8 IQ points is the estimate of what people, if they use it heavily. And there's the, sort of burnt out, lack of motivation, demotivational phenomenon. About 10% of people who use cannabis will develop an addiction. That's up to 30% in children, though, because they're particularly vulnerable to its effects. So there are certain vulnerable populations, and we don't really have a good sense of how dangerous it is while driving, but we have no question that people should not be driving stoned. In all of the experiments that have been done to look at these drugs, we know that, for pain, MS is an area of expertise of mine, and for all the experiments to look at the role of marijuana and cannabis for pain, people had to sign up and say, I will not be driving for 6 months while I'm in this study because I'm going to be high on, marijuana for the 6 months. And I shouldn't be out there driving an automobile while I'm stoned. So there's no question that vulnerable populations, especially people with MS who have an increased chance of cognitive impairment, really need to be careful. But you've really hit the nail on the head by going right for one of the most vulnerable populations, in addition to children, are people who have mental illness. So what we do know, for which there is really no debate any longer, is that for people who have bipolar disorder especially, we know that the use of cannabis is associated with worse psychosis, worse depression, worse suicidality, suicidal thinking, and worse, mood control. So for bipolar patients, it really is something that needs to be thought about as a real worsening of their condition, and it is a potentially lethal condition. The other group for which there is, a tremendous amount of data are people who have schizophrenia in their family. So schizophrenia is 1% of the world's population will have schizophrenia. This is when you have hallucinations. You hear voices talking to you in the third person. It's associated with paranoia, delusions that people are out to harm you. It affects your cognition, executive function, etc. And we don't have great treatments for it, unfortunately. And we who have been in the trenches of treating patients with various conditions and family members who have schizophrenia, if you have a member of your family or a close relative with schizophrenia and you start smoking cannabis heavily, you increase fivefold your chances of getting schizophrenia. That's not a little side effect. Schizophrenia is a very debilitating condition. And there is now ample evidence to suggest that at the very least, you wouldn't have had nearly as severe a case, but also it appears that the rates of schizophrenia is going up in the world in places that this has been made to be legal in the sense that it is commonly available. And so because in this country it's federally illegal, but legal in the states, most of the states in this country. So it's a real problem that for vulnerable people, it appears that the rates are going up fivefold. To give that a specific number, that means that if you have a first degree relative in your family, you go from a risk of, a few percentage to now 10 to 20%, maybe 30% of people who smoke heavily, who have a history of psychosis in their family, are going to get psychotic. And that is an enormous number. And I will tell you, trying to treat people who have become psychotic by using cannabis heavily with this vulnerability in the family, it's not everybody. You have to have this running in your family. It's very hard to get it under control once the genie is out of the bottle. it's very hard to get it back in, and it's a devastating impact on people's lives. So these are really severe side effects that one needs to take into account. It doesn't mean not everybody has bipolar disorder. Not everybody has psychosis in their family. But for those people who do, you really need to try to impress upon them that this has really life-threatening and life-changing consequences.
You know what?
Please.
Regarding the question, running into families, because I recently found multiple videos online, people, they are talking about their experiences, and I realized those people basically developed schizophrenia being already in adulthood, so being already adult. So for me, it's kind of a question now, like, do we really need this particular disorder run into family in a family, or we can actually develop it at any stage of our life?
Yeah, and it's true that there's paraphrenia. People can get schizophrenia late in life and the like. With respect to the THC, all I can tell you is that the data really suggests that if you, and you don't always know because people lose track, and the people who have schizophrenia or psychosis, they get lost from the family conversation and the like. But without question, if you know that there's a family member that has psychosis, or a first degree relative, aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents, siblings, then you're really talking about a dramatic increase in risk. It's not that you can't get psychotic. Lots of people can get psychotic while using the marijuana, the THC in particular, which has gone up 5-fold in its potency because we've been cultivating this, cannabis plant to really enhance this THC, which is the psychotropic effect. In THC, CBD does not cause these effects. This is a THC phenomenon. And the problem is that we know the association, if you have it in your families, in terms of it starting and staying. Lots of people can have psychotic experiences transiently, but the data really suggests that if it's going to be long-term and unmask this vulnerability, and you're right, we don't know for sure. Could it be something that some people rarely get without a family member? Sure, that's certainly possible. The thing is, though, when you're talking 10 to 20% chance with heavy daily use of becoming schizophrenic, which, let me tell you, nobody wants that disease because it's so hard to control. We really lack really good treatments for it. It's not that we don't have treatments, we do, but they aren't nearly as effective as we'd like them to be, and they have side effects. So the real problem is that that's an enormous risk to take. It's not that there aren't other risks, or maybe a risk of having it without a family member, but we know that the 10 to 20%, 1 in 5 people, is an enormous risk to take.
That's a lot. Yes. You already discussed, already told a little bit about, but I would like to articulate this question more clearly.
Please.
What is the differences between CBD and THS?
Yeah.
Especially in terms of their effect on the body and mind.
Yeah. So CBD, cannabidiol, and THC is tetrahydrocannabinol. The THC, so it turns out we have within us receptors to these particular drugs. They're called endocannabinoids. So you have cannabinoids, which are THC and CBD that the plant produces. Plants actually produce over 100 different varieties of cannabinoids, but THC and CBD are the ones that most people know about and have the biggest effect. And CBD works really in ways that we're not 100% sure precisely, but it works more through the CB2 receptor instead of the CB1. The CB2 receptor is on the immune system. It probably, and also in the central nervous system, it probably has a lot to do with anti-inflammatory effects. So that's why CBD is used for pain, particularly related to inflammation. But THC works predominantly through the CB1 receptor, this cannabinoid receptor, which is inside of us, meaning that we produce our own endocannabinoids. So anandamide is like the equivalent of THC that we produce, that is actually what we use to help regulate our emotions and our anxiety level and the like. So we produce this inside of ourselves.
So it's in the healthy body. Basically, healthy body is totally capable of even create it.
Exactly. And so it is, so just like there's opiates out there, which you can, oxycodone and morphine and heroin, we also, when people talk about the runner's high comes because we have our own opiates, the the internal opiates that our bodies produce. We also produce our own cannabis-like drugs, but unlike THC, which has this what we call biphasic effect, low dose is good, high dose is bad, cause paranoia, psychosis, increased anxiety. These internal drugs, anandamide derives from the Sanskrit word for bliss or happiness. It only has positive effects. It doesn't cause us to become psychotic or anything like that. It's not biphasic. It has just positive effects inside of us. And so people are working now on coming up with drugs that will increase levels of anandamide that we have in our brains, because that would be preferable than this THC that's produced by plants to try to prevent us from eating them, and the like. So just to answer the question, I'm sorry I went off a bit on a tangent.
No. It's important to know. So you mentioned multiple times. I know that you don't have that much time. I have a few questions left. Only 3 of them. Okay, so you mentioned multiple times about the dosage. So dosage is the most important thing. We know that the dosage will define the amount of side effects and how the reaction of your body. So we all so different, with all different weight, body structure, food habits. What is the best way to understand how much is enough? Because I know that there is probably approximations in terms of the weight, but what is your perspective as a high-level professional on the dosage? How to define the safe dosage for people who use it against pain for medical reasons?
Yeah. Well, and again, just to go back to emphasize the point you brought up, which is an important one, there isn't a safe dosage for people with, schizophrenia in their family or bipolar disorder. There just isn't a safe dose.
No, zero.
Zero is the safe dose. But for those people who don't have that and are getting it for its therapeutic benefit, the safe dose is, should be, and we say this in medicine as a general bit of wisdom, you always want to start low and go slow. And what's really unusual about cannabis is that for those people who have used it previously, they know exactly what the symptoms are. They know exactly what's going on. When people first use it, they notoriously say, "Oh, I'm not high. I don't understand what you're talking about," but they're laughing hysterically at things, or having, sort of thoughts about, "Oh, gee, have you ever thought about the fact that, a fort has 4 tines and not 3 or 1?" They have these sort of pseudo heavy philosophical, which we could talk about, thoughts, but they don't realize because they don't know the symptoms. So the problem when people get started with this, if they don't have any experiences, they do a little bit, they don't notice the effects because they're not familiar with the drug yet. So then they take more, and then pretty soon they're in a situation where they suddenly think that someone's going to burst in the room and the cops are going to come get them because they get paranoid and anxious and the like. So, we recommend when you're using it therapeutically, you should start low and go slow and realize it's going to take probably at least a couple different times, unless you're with people who are experienced in its use and can sort of shepherd you through it, that it's going to have effects that you're not going to recognize initially. So it is hard to titrate the right dose if you don't know what the symptoms are of the intoxicating effects.
And that's the danger. That's the main danger.
Yeah.
As all drugs, it's like first high. It's the main reason why addiction is actually exists as a phenomena, right? There's and the thing is, as I understood, we saw in terms of how the human brain, since we are on a human brain platform,
Yes.
it's very the main sometimes, not sometimes. I believe it happens actually very often.
Mm-hmm.
Brain had hard time interpretation of the body signals.
Yep.
It's related to everything, related to the pain, related to the certain condition. Brain sometimes gives the wrong information,
Yep.
misinterpret. Sometimes it's for our benefits, sometimes it's against our benefit.
Yep.
And that's very important to have a better understanding what human brain is about, because we're still in the process.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I mean, the classic example of this that people need to know as well is that when you take people and you have them throw darts at a dartboard, and then you give them alcohol and they do the same thing, and you say, well, how'd you do? They say, oh, I did great when I had the alcohol. It relaxed me and everything. But when you look at the scores, they missed the board completely, or their ability to assess their level of performance is terrible when they get above a certain level of intoxication. And so that is why it is so risky to drive if you're at all intoxicated, because you don't know the level of impairment you have in your performance. And that's what's really scary. So the law is a little unusual. People don't realize this. We can't hold people responsible for running somebody over when they're drunk, because they literally don't have the cognitive capacity to know what's going on. So the way the law works is the law says when you were in the bar and you had the keys in your pocket and you had the car outside and you began to drink, that's what you're responsible for, because you knew that you were going to have no backup plan but to get in that car and drive drunk. We don't hold people responsible for what they did when they're drunk, because they were out of their normal, mind about, their performance. They couldn't assess it. That's a little lightning and thunder to emphasize the importance here. But when you yeah. So anyway, so I think nature has spoken. It's a big deal. Many people die.
I just really, because in terms of driving, what I recently found in a few years, because I've been driving a lot in the United States for hours, in it through different states. And there are so many things related to how brain understands the speed. And the most important thing is human brain very often loses understanding the speed. If there are multiple conditions can be. There's even phenomena associated with the velocity when you drive, let's say, more than 4 hours, your brain basically loses the control, loses the understanding of the feeling of the speed. And there are so many things. So especially if you intoxicated, you really have to be more conscious, definitely not to drive, because that's important. And a lot of unpredictable things can happen on the road Not because you can be sure in your driving capabilities on 100%. You can be the best driver ever who has like maximum control of the situation. But the thing is, that's the human brain. It loses understanding very often because of multiple reasons, especially when intoxication, because a lot of people, especially guys, they believe if they will take just a few shots, it will not affect them. And that's a huge mistake because it can affect that.
Yeah.
And the consequences can be absolutely unpredictable.
Absolutely.
So please be safe up there. We have only 2 questions left. Well, about the synthetic cannabinoids, how do they differ from plant-based? What do we know about the synthetic cannabinoids?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a broad topic. So one of the things that has happened is, as there have been restrictions about the use of THC and it being an intoxicating drug, people have looked for ways of getting around this. And one of the ways that people got around this was where the actual double bonds are, the type of bonding between the atoms and the specific structure. Delta 9 THC is the one that's made by plants. Delta 8 THC is a synthetic version. And so in many places, because it wasn't regulated, they started to put this into food, substances,
cosmetics, soaps, shampoo.
Well, yeah, but this THC was in gummies and stuff for people to get stoned. And unfortunately, it turns out that Delta 8 THC and the CDC and the National Institute of Drug Abuse have come out and said this Delta 8 appears to be more associated with psychotic symptoms, not more likely to cause schizophrenia, but just to make you hallucinate or have psychotic symptoms than the Delta 9. So you do have to be careful. Synthetic doesn't mean safer. What's interesting, though, what it does bring up is, I think that where a lot of people have gone, where THC and cannabis in general have become so popular and become legalized, is quite honestly, and it's just worth taking 1 second to mention this, is if you chart the amount of time that doctors have been spending with patients, talking to them, educating them, explaining about the risks and benefits of the medicines that they're getting and what the treatment is for, et cetera, et cetera. As that's gotten shorter and shorter, the number of treatments that people have gone to, these supplements, have gone up and up and up. And really, I think it's a failure on the part of my profession, physicians and care providers. Doctor derives from the Latin word for teacher. As we've done less and less teaching, people have now gone to wanting to talk to somebody who can say this type of cannabis is more likely to help you with sleep and pain. So, they're trying to get control over their own health in a time where they're not getting the information that they need from their care providers. And that is really, I think, what is really sad, is that we need not more alternative drugs about which we know far less and have much less control over, how well that they are made and synthesized, et cetera, et cetera. We need more chance to talk between patients and doctors and become educated about their care. And I think patients are now trying to take care into their own hands because they're not getting what they need from the medical system, which is broken in this country. And therefore, they're going to things like cannabis as a way of saying, I'm not going to take those drugs. It's not that the drugs are inherently any different than cannabis or THC. It's just that the drugs come from physicians who are not spending time educating their patients, Whereas the person, when you go to the dispensary, will take lots of time to explain to you which type of cannabis is the best for what symptoms you have, and sort of that part of medical care that people used to get from their clinicians, they're seeking out through these natural ways. But natural doesn't mean it's any less, effective or toxic than, or have fewer side effects than drugs that doctors are prescribing. It's just not coming with the explanation they need. So it's just worth thinking about.
Definitely. As understood, the clinicians, the victims of the structure of protocols, and sometimes they simply don't have time, space to do the things they're supposed to do. Sometimes it's just sometimes works against. Last question, which is extremely important for me, extremely one. Why? Because I am in California, and from my perspective, cannabis went too far here. So
what has gone too far there? I'm sorry.
Because it doesn't matter where you go.
Yeah.
You can smell.
Oh, it's everywhere. Yeah.
I heard feedbacks from people from different countries, especially like big events happening in San Francisco, that they never saw, because people travel from all around the world. I'm usually speak with scientists, with doctors, and they travel through all around the world, and they never experienced such thing that you can smell cannabis pretty much on every single step. Doesn't matter.
I know. Yeah, New York City is like that for sure.
Museum, restaurant, doesn't matter. Okay, question.
Yeah.
In terms of secondhand smoke and impact on children and on other people, how dangerous is second-hand smoke? How dangerous? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so this is you're asking very good questions. Unfortunately, they're very good questions about which we just don't have enough good information. So it took a long time for us to realize that secondhand smoke had really incredibly negative impact on kids with asthma, on the risk of cancer for the loved ones who were in the room or in the car with somebody smoking cigarettes. It took us a long time to appreciate that. We still haven't spent the kind of time to understand what the side effects are of these drugs for people who are using them directly. So the secondhand effects, we understand even less. So I think, though, that what you're bringing up is a very important thing. I will tell you that there's no question it's going to have the negative consequences for adolescents and young people in terms of shaving the IQ points off if they have constant exposure to the secondhand smoke or vaping and this kind of stuff. But at least as far as I know, and I haven't seen the literature on this recently, the studies still need to be done more carefully to look at the secondhand effects of cannabis, particularly on vulnerable populations. So it's something that is so important. You're absolutely right. But something, again, that because it's not FDA approved, didn't have to go through safety studies, and we really don't know fully what the secondhand effects are.
We don't know enough information. Okay, got you. Extremely helpful. Appreciate so much. Thank you so much.
No, this is so important. We've just decided that reality isn't as much fun as it should be. People talk about artificial intelligence. Well, we're doing artificial reality, like just enjoying yourself or going out into nature or being with friends isn't good enough anymore. And we have so much stress and worries and pain from various kind of chronic conditions that everybody is trying to run towards an artificial experience. And I think that it's fine to try to enhance at certain times, all things in moderation, including moderation. But, when used responsibly, cannabis can really help those people who have pain. When used responsibly, if they're not a vulnerable population. But the truth is that it has gotten way out of hand, where in New York City, you can't go past any corner without smelling large quantities of cannabis and marijuana use and the like. And it's just everywhere. And it's just gotten completely out of hand for for the level of our understanding of what the risk is very small. And the risk we're taking is very large. And I just think sometimes people have to ask themselves, is reality really so terrible that it's worth taking of these risks as frequently as we are? And I think that's an important question to ask, as to whether or not we need to be going into these places that are exposing us to what plants have made in an effort to give us a toxic exposure so we won't do it again. We keep doing it again and again and again. And we need to understand more about the risks. And so you're taking the time to bring this to people's attention, I think, is so important, because everything, has risks and benefits. We know about the benefits. Everybody talks about the help with pain, but we don't talk about the risks. So thank you for taking the time today to bring this up.
No, thank you for finishing up with a very big philosophical question. And I hope every single of our listener or people who watching us on YouTube will ask this question internally every time people trying to use something or go somewhere or be around someone. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.